Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, what a great way to use your talents if you can't use it,
Well, and
She can use it if she wants.
Yeah, she can go back into the
that's right. That's the upside of having children young, right? Is you can work later.
Anyway, so
The start class. Start class.
This morning, DJ McKnight will be talking to us during our class period and then again during services. For those of you who don't know DJ, he preaches over at the Northeast Claremont Church of Christ. My friend's here with him this morning. Been longtime friends. Fran actually worked for us for a little while, years ago. And DJ actually trained here 25? Something like that, years ago.
Yep.
So, old friends and a good worker in the kingdom, and we're looking forward to hearing from him this morning.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. If you'd open in your Old Testaments to the book of 1 Samuel, appreciate Barry bringing up that it's been 25 years since I trained here. That makes you feel good. 25 years ago when I was training here, I had just gotten married. And today I'm talking to people that were here during that time that have grandchildren that were my contemporaries. So that'll make you feel a certain way, right? Anyways. 1 Samuel 24, we're going to do something, I'll say this again in the worship session. We're going to do kind of a two-parter in a way out of 1 Samuel 24 and 1 Samuel 25. I'll expand on it a little bit more in the worship session, but there's a bit of a tension in those chapters, between the chapters. Chapter 24 that we're going to look at here in just a minute deals with David, one of the two times that David spares the life of Saul. And chapter 25, kind of the famous lesson there, is where Abigail kind of intercedes between David and Nabal, and Abigail ends up sparing a lot of people. And so we're going to kind of learn a couple lessons. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel here. We're going to really be looking at lessons that revolve around concepts of vengeance, taking vengeance, concepts of forgiveness and mercy, which, as we kind of work through this stuff this morning in these two sessions, hopefully, we kind of get in touch with the reality that these are lessons that are not just applicable, but are necessary for us, because these are things that we struggle with. Now, of course, these lessons on vengeance, these lessons on mercy and forgiveness and peacemaking, they're all kind of being taught through these very kind of extraordinary circumstances, right? And it's likely that none of us here will ever experience circumstances like David did, but the lessons, nonetheless, are obviously applicable. So let's go ahead and start. Both of these lessons kind of necessitate a lengthy reading. So let's go ahead and read some text for our lesson this morning. We'll kind of get that out of the way. I don't mean it the way that it sounds, but let's go ahead and read it, and it'll give us a basis and a foundation for the lessons that we'll take out of the text, okay? So 1 Samuel 24, starting verse 1. It says, when Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, and there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave, and the men of David said to him, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemies into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you. Then David arose and stealthily cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And afterward, David's heart struck him, because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. Afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks your harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong for treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you. But my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dog, after a flea. May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it, and plead my cause, and deliver me from your hand." As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house." And David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. So as we think about this story, there's a little bit of context, obviously, that helps in understanding exactly what's going on here and the significance of what David does. At this point in David's life, he's we know rose to the top, and in a sense has kind of fallen from grace. Is probably how we would have represented that if we lived in David's time. As a matter of fact, we're going to see in the next chapter, in chapter 25, this interaction between David and Nabal. That's exactly kind of what the public opinion of David was. Nabal talks about this guy David. Who is this guy David, right? He talks about how many people these days are departing from their masters. And basically, the public opinion was, of course, because Saul was still in power and David was fleeing for his life, that God had deserted David and that God was still with Saul. That's how people perceive things, right? And so David is in this really kind of tough spot. He's kind of gained everything, and then he's lost everything. And just to kind of remind you, here's kind of a short list. David has lost his position, right? He was just not too long ago, before the story, second in command, essentially running Israel's army, right? He was the general of the troops. He has lost his possessions. Though he kind of came from a simple life, he had come to a place where he had much possessions as a result of him slaying Goliath. He had lost pretty much all of his relationships that he had up until that point. His mentor Samuel is separated from him. David's living in a cave. Samuel doesn't seem to be coming and visiting much. So his mentor is not around to give him advice, to help him, to offer bits of wisdom, to kind of get him through these moments. His best friend, Jonathan, is not in the cave with him either. So he's been separated from the comfort of his best friend. He's been separated from the advantages that come from having a mentor. His wife is not with him. She is also gone. His family, we find out, is for a moment not with him, but eventually has to flee. They're part of the package deal that come with these disgruntled individuals that become the mighty men of valor. But they're not with him at this moment either. So everything that is familiar to David, his possessions, his relationship, his positions of prestige, even in a sense his freedom, right? I mean, if you're living in a cave and you're always hiding and you're on the run, you don't really consider yourself a free person. So, and you also don't consider yourself a person of dignified living circumstances. So David is living this kind of undignified, lonely, solitary, shameful existence in this cave, and he's living with a bunch of guys that are just grumps, right? That's the way that God describes them. They're people that are disgruntled. They're people that have been done wrong, probably by Saul. They're in a way kind of political refugees, people that have been maybe cast out themselves, and certainly are kind of negative in their disposition. And even in all of this, and maybe because of all of this, we see David in this moment being a way that many of us struggle with at what we would consider our best moments, our best times, when everything in life is lining up exactly the way that we hoped it would. David is somehow able to deal with all of that successfully. Now, all of these problems that David is encountering, all this suffering, actually has a face. It doesn't always work out that way in life, right? Sometimes in life we're just going through things and it seems like we can't get on top of the circumstances of our life. We have these reversals, as we call them, that happen to us. And there's nothing that we can do about it. It's just circumstances. It's just happenstance, right? Time and chance, as we quote from the Bible, happens to us. Sometimes we have reversals that are economic. Sometimes we have reversals that are relational. Sometimes we have reversals that affect our dignity or our pride. Very seldom, though, do we have all of those things happen at once. And even more seldom in life do we have all of those things happen at once at the hand of one person. And so all of David's struggles, all of his suffering has a name. It has a face. And that face is attached to the body that walks into this cave on this day. How do we respond in similar moments? Again, we're probably not ever going to have a moment exactly like this. But there are some that do. How do we respond when there's a name and a face to our suffering? When one thing has happened to us, a betrayal has taken place, and we've lost something significant, something meaningful to us. How do we respond when that happens to us? And let's be honest, what is our natural inclination? What are our hopes? Not just our hopes for ourselves, but our hopes for that person. How do we think of them? What is the internal dialogue that takes place inside of our minds and in our hearts regarding that individual? So we know what it should be, and we know sometimes what it actually is. So there ends up being a gap there, right? And that needs to be resolved. That's what these lessons are for, is to help us resolve such a thing. And so we're going to ask a couple questions and try to answer those questions from this particular piece of text. The first question being, what are the reasons and the way that leads to vengeance? Because that's the opportunity that David has here. David has an opportunity to take it out on Saul, to give him what he deserves, as we would say, right? To get some sort of relief, to get some sort of satisfaction. So what do we learn here about the reasons and the way to vengeance? If we're going to choose vengeance, how do we get there? What does that road look like? We often say it's kind of a slippery slope, and it is. And sometimes we end up there without even realizing what happened, how we got there. So it's probably important that we try to answer that question. What does vengeance produce within us? So if that's what we choose, it's an option, right? What does that produce within us? Now, I'm not saying what does that produce in our life necessarily, although we will talk about that. But what does it do to our souls? What does it do to our spirits? What does it do to our hearts? What kind of person does vengeance turn us into? And then how do we avoid that? Because I think once we get to that point in the discussion, we're all going to agree none of us want to be there, right? Vengeance is an ugly thing. It turns us into a type of monster. None of us want to be consumed by that kind of anger and hatred. If you've ever been there in your life, you know how terrible that existence is. So how do we avoid that? What do we learn from this lesson about how to just not get there to begin with? How do we stop the slide, the decline when it starts to happen? And then ultimately, what can we look forward to if we can avoid this? There is a reward in avoiding vengeance. There is something that God gifts us. Now, there's a cost, there's a price to avoiding it, but there also is a commodity. There's something that we gain by avoiding it altogether. And so we want to kind of explore that a little bit as well. So those are the things we're going to try to answer. So let's first talk about this kind of way to vengeance. How do we get there? How do we get to this place where maybe we're sticking the knife in the back instead of cutting off the edge of the robe? How does that happen? How does it take place? What is the reasons for it? Like what's going on inside of us that makes us feel like, that's all right. That's okay. Actually, maybe even that's the right thing to do, right? How do we do it? You want to answer? Go for it.
I'm going to try.
All right.
You start in your heart and your mind, and you really persuade yourself to think about that person in a negative way.
Yeah.
When you start thinking about that person, I'm going to get him back because he did so-and-so to me, he did this to me.
Yeah.
And I'm just not going to take it anymore. And that just starts just building up in your heart so much that that's where the vengeance comes.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, we call that, I think we can call it, characterization. If you go, I don't know if they do this anymore. Again, I'm old. But if you go to places like Knott's Berry Farm, that's still a place, right? People say, okay. Knott's Berry Farm. You get in this kind of weird time warp thing that happens. Knott's Berry Farm, Magic Mountain. There used to be these people that would sit off kind of to the side of the walkways and they would draw cartoon figures. And this is a weird human kind of thing. I don't know why we do these things, a weird behavioral thing. We would pay people to draw pictures of us that would take the parts of us that we hate the most and make them as big as possible so that we can hang these things in our house and everybody that would come in would laugh at us. Okay. But we do that. That's kind of a silly illustration, but we actually do that with people, don't we? And I think that's what you're talking about. You're talking about this thing that we do with people. When they sin against us, we lock in that sin, and it becomes the defining characteristic of the individual. We characterize them. So if someone comes up to us and says, Bob Smith hurt us, right? In some way. He lied to us. And someone comes up and says, I met Bob Smith the other day. Oh, Bob Smith. Let me tell you about Bob Smith. Bob Smith is a liar. Now, is that fair? Did he lie? Yeah. Did he lie to you? Yes. But to characterize him as a liar is kind of a characterization. It's to take the defect of the individual and say, this is all they are. This is the only way that I think about this person. And all of that is the first step towards justification of the type of anger that leads to hatred, that leads to different forms of murder that Jesus talked about, right? We'll talk about that a couple times today, I think. But that characterization is the first step to self-justification, to hurt somebody. Let me give you a kind of a list of some other things. We do this, we enact vengeance because we believe we deserve it, right? That's kind of we'll start at the low-hanging fruit. We were wronged, we're owed, and so I'm going to take what's rightfully mine. That's what we do. We believe that it will end our pain. Has anybody ever enacted revenge on somebody in some way, shape, or form, subtle or non-subtle, maybe, thinking, I just need some relief from the agony that that person inflicted upon me? Anybody ever done that? I have done that. Let me ask you, is there anybody here that actually resolved the pain inside of them through that act of vengeance? Now, vengeance is tricky because the first time you do it, and when you do it, initially it feels kind of good, which is the hook, right? It's why we do it. But the reality is, shortly after that, and I don't know how this all works or what the time frame is, it's probably different for everybody, the hurt comes back. And it doesn't really fix it, never really fixes it. It just festers, and oftentimes it becomes worse. Sometimes we do the bad thing to the person as a response to the bad thing they did to us, and somehow we end up hating them more afterwards. That doesn't sound like a fix to me. That's not a fix. Sometimes we believe that it's the morally right thing to do, that it's even God-sanctioned, right? And that's kind of the argument in this text, is it not? This is the day that you told us about, that God told you about, is the argument from his men. This is the day. Now, there's a lot of presumption there, isn't there? Now, I have no doubt that God comforted David by saying, look, this is how this is all going to turn out, David. Someday, Saul will come off the throne and you will go on to it. That will happen. But to then say, this is it, this is the day, without God telling you that this is the day, that's a big step, right? Kind of a misstep. But that could have very easily and almost was the logic to taking Saul's life. Because they thought, well, this is the right thing to do. And sometimes we don't say it exactly that way, and we don't have kind of prophetic messages like that. But we do kind of say, well, they got what they deserved, right? When bad things happen to people who have done bad things to us. Is that not kind of a cloaked way of saying the same thing? That finally God brought to them what they deserved because of what they did to us? Yeah, what were you going to say? That's right.
And he knew that.
Yeah.
But this was God's anointed, had been. So he did not harm Saul. He would not because of God. Well, in our situation, in our workforce and all that, how dare us not to forgive? I have found that if you kill them with kindness, all of a sudden they like you, which they didn't before. They had things against you. But if you kill it with kindness, they come back around and you're better than bread and butter. That's the way it works. Unfortunately, we don't let the Holy Spirit that resides in us talk to us and tell us this is not that important. That it's more important that you have a relationship with that person so you can teach them.
Sure.
That's our purpose.
Sure. That's good. Good. All right, we're going to come back to some of that in just a minute, but I'm going to try to remember to kind of swing back around and point at you when I'm talking about that. Those are some good points. Sometimes we also settle for symbolic vengeance. There's a little bit of that in the story, isn't there? This kind of symbolic vengeance. David has a knife. He doesn't stick it in Saul's back, but he doesn't cut a piece of his robe. It's a lesser act, right? And sometimes we feel that through the lesser acts, we're somewhat justified. It's actually part of the magic of this story, and kind of the way that it hits us and convicts us, is that David takes the lesser act but doesn't actually feel good about it. He feels bad about it because he understands. He's spiritually insightful enough. He's self-aware enough to realize what he's actually doing there. He's not telling himself a lie, buying into the lie, and then perpetuating the lie back to his men, right? He's actually being convicted by what he's done in the symbolic act. You know, this idea of, I could have hurt you, I chose not to. David says that later on when he's confronting Saul, but it doesn't, you don't really read that and understand that as David taking a victory lap. That's not an end zone dance, right? He's not spiking the ball in front of Saul. What David is doing there is something kind of altogether different. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But sometimes we kind of take that route that is somewhat symbolized in the story of taking lesser actions, and we feel like we're taking the high road, when in fact it's not a high road at all, right? It's just one that keeps us in the right and keeps them in the wrong. Yeah.
Would you say David took the high road in his circumstances?
I would say David took a different road, not the high road, the way that we use that phrase. It is a higher road, but even David convicted himself that it wasn't the right way, right? So the way that we use how do we use the phrase high road?
Well, that's what I'm getting at too. There's a whole range, a spectrum. That's
Sure.
why I wanted to get your thought, because
Yeah.
he may not be all the way at the highest road.
Mhm.
He's not down here, because just like I think you're alluding to, and others are too, is we can take the really low version of that, where it's like, they got you, sucker.
Yeah.
But I didn't.
That's right.
What about me?
That would have been the obnoxious version. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's down
Yeah.
here, and he's up here, but yeah, maybe he's not all the way up. He's not God. He's not ultimately perfect righteous.
So give me a second to try to answer that, and if I don't, come back to me. But I think I have an answer for that, but it kind of fits in a little bit better with something I'm going to say in just a minute. Yeah, but I think that's the right question. I think we're on the right track in asking something like that. So the takeaway at this point, when we ask the question, what's the way to vengeance? The takeaway is that vengeance doesn't necessarily require bloodshed, nor does it require eye for an eye. And I think that's kind of important, right? There is a form of vengeance that David is taking here, which I think is illustrated again in the fact that he's convicted by it. He realized he's guilty of something, and he has to be repentant of that. It can be passive aggression, right? It can be withholding affection. It can be cutting off someone emotionally. It can be even kind of masquerading our evil intents for somebody with kind of spiritual wisdom. There's a lot of ways that we can take vengeance on somebody that isn't going after the jugular, is the point, right? And that seems to be what's happening with David. David he takes, again, the knife, and he uses the knife in a lesser form of vengeance, and realizes I shouldn't have even done that. And we have to acknowledge that we do the same thing, right? In the moment when we could go for the jugular, sometimes as Christians we hold back because we know to go for the jugular would just make us as terrible as they are, and we're okay with a lesser form of terrible, as if that's okay. But the reality is, David kind of illustrates for us, which kind of makes me mad at him, right? I wish he would have just gone for the lesser form of evil and done the end zone dance, and then I would feel justified in doing the same thing. But he doesn't do that. He realizes that even this lesser form is too far. It's too much. It's something he shouldn't have done. Go ahead. No, go for it. Hey, by the way, both these texts we're looking at today are kind of wrestle with texts. They're nuanced. So don't feel weird about that, and that's fine. Ask as many questions. I don't know if I'll have the answer for you, but let's ask.
If I can remember the question that I said, the first thing that popped in my head was, I kind of want to believe that there's a high road, the highest road version that somebody could be in or at in cutting the road. Because it's just like Saul, even if it's wrong, no matter what, God's like, no matter what, cut the road is wrong, no matter what, but your heart knows. And I think that's the key to what David, he gives that. Like, without that key part, it may not be so clear, like, oh, this is wrong. Because otherwise I think, like, somebody in a good heart, even if it is wrong, you did it with a heart that wasn't to get vengeance.
Yeah.
I just want to know, like, man, I really don't want this trouble. And I just want to show you, like, hey, look, pretty slim, probably for that to happen. Maybe it never would with a human. But it's all about the heart there, right? Because I think he's speaking his heart. And now, like I said, I forgot the question.
It's all right. But let's talk a little bit more. If it comes back to you, just raise your hand. I don't mind if you interrupt me. It's fine. Yeah.
I think in some ways David actually got better vengeance because he had the courage to confront Saul. And he didn't confront him like out in the open, coming from the valleys, across the valley. He came up upon Saul. And Saul probably thought David would never do that. He's afraid of him. But he proved Saul wrong.
Yeah.
Secondly, he showed Saul that he was vulnerable.
Yeah, I think maybe the goal of the lesson is understand that vengeance is never okay in any form. And what needs to replace vengeance is, and we're going to get to this. I'm kind of letting you eat the icing before we bake the cake. But we need to replace vengeance with things like forgiveness and mercy. And those have at least the potential of effects on a person that we might then say, well, David got Saul, right? But that shouldn't be our objective. Our objective shouldn't be to get somebody. I think ultimately, one of the things that we learn when we get into this lesson about vengeance, and maybe we don't learn it here, maybe we do, I don't know, is sometimes we use the high road, or how we're going to talk about this, right? The lesser form of vengeance as a way, and even forgiveness and mercy as a tool of manipulation. What we do is we say, well, I'm going to forgive this person. I'm going to be merciful to this person. I'm going to take the high road. And the reason I'm going to do that is because then they'll turn around. And the way that we know we do this is because sometimes, I've had many of these conversations over the years, someone comes to me and says, somebody hurt me deeply. My husband hurt me deeply. My wife hurt me deeply. I mean, we're talking about the deep cuts, right? And I say, well, okay, what does God want us to do in situations like that? Truly, God wants us to learn how to be merciful and forgive, right? And I'm not kidding. I would say 8 times out of 10 in those conversations in the decades that I've had them, people say, well, I can't forgive this person because I know it won't work. What does that mean? The only reason I'm forgiving them or showing mercy is in order to manipulate their behavior, is in order to change them or turn them, which, by the way, is never in Scripture. We take this idea that's given to us in Romans about heaping burning coals on people's head as if forgiveness is manipulation, that it's something that we're supposed to kind of wield in a way to make people conform to a way of behaving. And that's not actually the biblical perspective on mercy. That's not actually the biblical perspective on forgiveness and why we're supposed to extend it to people, right? So, all right, let's move a little bit. So what does vengeance produce in us? Like, what's the warning? We have to kind of go outside the text a little bit for that. I'm going to we can go to a bunch of texts, but I'm going to go to Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12 and verse 15 says, see to it that no one comes short of the grace of God. By the way, that's the basis of what he's about ready to say. See to it that no one comes short of the mercy of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. So why does God want us to envision bitterness, which is kind of what we're talking about here, right? Why does God want us to envision bitterness like a root? Not a trunk, not a tree, not its leaves, not its branches, a root. We live in San Diego, which is the land of palm trees, right? That's Southern California, but I don't know about you. I hate palm trees. I hate them with a passion. I didn't hate them until I was a homeowner, but now I hate palm trees because palm trees just decide to grow. You don't plant them. If your neighbors have them a mile away, you're going to have a palm tree someday, just so you know. It's going to happen. And palm trees grow, and they grow fast. Sometimes, if you're not out in your yard for a couple weeks, you go out there and you got a palm tree. It's like a whole palm tree in your backyard. And getting rid of a palm tree is no fun if you've ever had to get rid of one. You can do the whole stump grinding thing, right? Cut it down, grind it out. It doesn't matter. A couple months later, that palm tree is coming back because it's got fibrous roots. And it's just enough to make you go crazy. But that's how vengeance works in us. That's why God envisions it like a root. Because sometimes we say, well, I'm going to cut the tree down, right? Whatever it is that's causing me to feel that way, I'll cut it down. All right, I cut it down. I forgave that person. But we don't grind out the stump, so it grows back. Sometimes we go further, right? First stage, second stage, third stage of forgiveness. We cut down the tree. We grind out the stump. We get it all out of the ground. We cover it back up. We make it look like it did before. And then it grows back. Because the roots haven't been dealt with, right? The roots are still there. And God's just trying to illustrate for us that we can actually accept the grace of God and actually do it its greatest disservice, the grace of God, its greatest disservice, by not digging the roots out. Because that's how bitterness works. It's down deep, it's invisible, you've kind of smoothed it all over, it's all done, it's forgotten about. But as soon as years down the road, somebody brings up the name of that person that hurt you way back when, what happens? Miracle palm tree. It grows, just appears. And you're like, I thought I dealt with that. I thought I dealt with that. And what God is saying is there's a real danger here, a real legitimate danger. And it's a big, scary one. And it's super, super hard to deal with, right? God's telling us, if you think that forgiveness is easy, envision it this way. It's like a root of bitterness. And if you've ever gotten rid of a tree, you understand how much work is required to get that root out. That's why God wants us to envision it that way. Vengeance has kind of these inescapable effects on us as well. When the root is there, it has a way of doing a couple things. Let me give them to you just real quick in a list. It calluses our conscience, right? It causes us to get hard hearts. It feeds our self-righteousness. When someone has done wrong to us and we harbor that, they're guilty, we're innocent. Can I see a show of hands of anybody in this building that's actually innocent? None of us are. It's...
When I was a child, I used to watch, back in Arkansas, I used to watch men remove stumps with their roots. They stick a dynamite under it and they move the roots out.
That's good. It's a good illustration.
It's applicable to
Yeah.
us if we let the Holy Spirit, if we have prayer and the Holy Spirit, those roots are gone. You can have someone that does you horribly in life. You will hurt, but you will not be bitter when you carry that person to prayer every day or on. You will not have that bitterness. Those roots will be gone.
It's good.
So my analogy there is the Holy Spirit is that dynamite that we use to get rid of those roots.
That's good. That's good. I like that analogy. And I agree. And I think you can maybe even put a couple things in its place. One being, maybe the main one being in my mind, is the cross. The cross is a stick of dynamite as well, because that's the source of our mercy, right? We gain mercy at the cross. So whenever the cross is before us, it's hard. It's hard when you're taking God's mercy every single day. I'm wrong, I'm not right, right? But that's what bitterness does. Bitterness substitutes the cross for self-justification. It keeps us in the category of being right and other people in the category of being wrong. And when we do that, then we can stand before God just based on what we've done, because we're not like those other people. But it also, the downside of it, the evil side of it, the dark web side of it, is that it keeps us in bondage. And you've heard this said before. I mean, modern psychologists kind of understand this, but maybe not from a biblical perspective, that whenever you allow somebody to hold on to you through the evils that they've done to you, you stay captive to them. And modern psychologists will tell you that that's re-victimization. By holding on to that bitterness, by not letting it go, finding a way, maybe through forgiveness and mercy, which is really the only way that works, what you allow people to do is re-injure you over and over and over and over again. So oftentimes we think revenge is the release of pain. In reality, what revenge is it's the cement to pain, right? It's what causes pain to be concrete in our lives and in our hearts. We don't heal ourselves by wounding others. We heal by handing our wounds over to God. And that's the only way that it works, to your point. That's the only way that it works. Was that the first bell, second bell? First bell. Was that even a bell?
It wasn't a bell.
Did I imagine that?
You got about 10 minutes.
Was it somebody's text tone, maybe? Okay. I'm so sensitive that somebody's phone went off and I thought the bell was ringing.
There will be 2 bells.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So what do we learn from this about avoiding vengeance? How do we avoid vengeance? How does that happen? So this is where we come back into the story. We're leaving Hebrews now, coming back into the story. What does David teach us here when he exits the cave? That's kind of where we learn it, right? Maybe a little bit in the cave, but also in exiting the cave, about avoiding kind of what could be, right? Which is the worst case scenario. Anybody have any thoughts about that? What does David teach us about how do we avoid it? Spend enough time defining it and looking at its dangers. How do we keep it from happening? Yeah.
We have to go to God, because David said, let the Lord
That's right.
So I would say we need to do the same thing.
That's right.
Prayer, speaking to our spouse and our confidant about the situation. Don't internalize it. Because when we hold it in and depend on us being able to fix it ourselves, that's what happens.
True, true. We do have to be careful with the speaking it out thing, right? Because our bitterness can become other people's bitterness. I think that fits into the Hebrews model. We got to be careful that we don't embitter other people. So when we do talk about it, I don't disagree with talking about it, but when we do talk about it, we have to kind of frame that through kind of a biblical perspective, right? How do I show mercy to this person? I know what God is asking me to do. I'm struggling to do it. I know that's a me problem, not a them problem. Those types of conversations are actually helpful, right? As opposed to, man, this person, let me tell you about them. They really did it to me. And sometimes we think that complaining is working through a problem, but in reality what it's doing is magnifying the problem, right? It's making it worse by planting that seed or that root into somebody else's heart, who then has to carry this burden and will eventually offload it onto somebody else, who will offload it onto somebody else, and that's how the Hatfield and McCoy's thing it starts, right? That's right.
Someone who can honestly say, hey, stop.
That's right. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, that's right. That's right. A Jonathan, right? Someone like that. Yeah, that's right. A true friend. Yeah.
If we were to use the vernacular, I don't think it accurately described it, but a high road or low road, David recognized he took the low road.
Yeah.
And I believe that he recognized that the hurt, the harm that he did to King Saul was first more directed at his own heart, his own motivation, his thoughts, what he wanted to do versus what he did to King Saul. And we can see that in our own lives when we decide to extend the same type of grace and mercy that we want, that God gives us. And it's very difficult for us to emulate that, to let go of it, to offer it to someone else. I believe in this text and with David and knowing David, the way that we do through Scripture, he could feel these roots of bitterness growing in himself. That would make him react even more adversarial against King Saul and others.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I would say the number one thing is we've got to feel something that is not easy to feel. Right? I mean, that's kind of where this whole thing starts. David feels guilt the moment he does what he does. At least that's the way the story is written for us. But all of that is based on, again, his understanding of God, his perspective of God, and that God is in control and God is working in all of our lives. And ultimately, people are in the position that they're in because God is allowing them to be there, right? David feels super deep about this. Have you ever connected this back with 1 Samuel 15? You remember what happens in 1 Samuel 15? It's Samuel's confrontation with Saul. When Saul didn't obey God and he's coming back from battle and he's got all the spoil. And that's where Samuel tells Saul, it's over. This is it. Do you remember how that all happened? He tells him, and Samuel, in Samuel's style, kind of drops the mic and walks away. Do you remember what Saul did in reaction to that? He grabs a hold of Samuel and says, don't go. And Samuel just keeps walking. And then Samuel's robe tears because Saul's holding on to him. My wife would call that having a baby fit. That's what he's doing. He holds on to the robe of Samuel. Samuel's robe tears, and Samuel, in maybe inspiration of the Holy Spirit or just a moment of brilliance, turns around. Do you remember what he said? The way that you tore my robe, God has torn the kingdom out of your hands. And here we have a situation where David, who is in possession of the Holy Spirit, walks up, which, by the way, doesn't mean that we're always going to do the right thing, walks up and cuts the corner of Saul's robe off. It's not hard to make the connection, right? That the metaphor that David maybe has in his mind, when he's doing it for the wrong reasons, is I'm not gonna stab you, but I am gonna send a message. And the message is, Saul, if you're paying attention, the way that Samuel told you that's gonna happen, I'm just gonna take this little bit from your robe, your kingly garment, and I'm gonna have it for myself. Because it's gonna remind you and me who's the real king in Israel. But the reality is, that's not true yet. David has not ascended to the throne. He's not actually the active king. Though he's the anointed king, he's not the active king yet. Because God has not yet taken Saul, removed him off the throne officially, and put David on it. And I think this is what gets David. David knows in his heart of hearts, this is kind of my only explanation for what's going on here, right? David knows that he has just overstepped in a huge way. What he has done is he has kind of asserted his timeline over God's timeline. And he has said, I just want everybody to know, including myself and maybe even my men, that I'm the real king, Saul, and you're not. And this bothers David deeply. And I think sometimes we just don't have that kind of conviction. I mean, we do little things instead of the big thing, and we don't realize how big of a transgression that is. That what we're doing is we're taking our timeline, our wishes, our wants, and we're inserting them into God's, and we're saying this is the way that it needs to be. And when we do that, when we overstep like that, we should feel the way that David does. We should, but we don't. And everything that I think you can apply from that point on, as far as all the things that he does, he confronts his supporters and he convicts them. He goes out and he confronts Saul, but in a very personal and peaceful way. He entrusts justice to God and doesn't take it himself. All of those are extensions of the first thing. So we can talk about all those things, and you can think about all those things, but if you can't get the first thing, then you're not going to get any of it, really. All of it is really acknowledging that God is in control. That's the secret to forgiveness. The secret to mercy is to fully embrace this reality that God is in control of our lives, and God is in control of history, and God does things in the way that God does them, and we're here to try to seek out what that is and fall in line with his timeline. And he gives us things like mercy and forgiveness to do that. Just one quick thing. If the question is, what should we expect? We probably shouldn't expect what happens here. What happens here is kind of extraordinary. Or maybe we should. Because David goes out and he confronts Saul, and what's Saul's reaction? All right, I get it. I see now. Saul has this kind of weird moment of clarity and is in a sense repentant in the moment, right? So maybe we shouldn't expect that. It's lovely when that does happen, but it's not guaranteed that it's going to happen. And again, we can't use this as a means of manipulation. We can't say, well, because that person didn't do what Saul did in the moment, that person in our life that we're forgiving, that we're extending mercy to, then forgiveness doesn't work. Because then we're seeing it as a manipulation, as opposed to an extension of what has been given to us, which in the New Testament is where mercy and forgiveness always flows from. It always flows from the fact that God has given it to us. We are undeserving of it, just like our adversaries are undeserving of it. We give it because it's been given, and that's it. And the reason we do it is because we're trying to perpetuate God in a culture where he's absent by and large, right? But if by chance we experience what David did with Saul, and the person that we're interacting with reacts the way that Saul does, just know that it's a possibility that it's here today and gone tomorrow, right? And that doesn't relinquish you from continuing to forgive that person. Because that person had a moment of clarity and then turned away from it, doesn't mean that you should forsake forgiveness and mercy, compassion, right? And all those things that we're called to do because of the cross. All right, I know there's a lot of questions. And these are things that we have to struggle with and wrestle with in our relationship with God, and we can't answer them all in one class session. But I think there's a foundation here that we can work off of. Yeah, I'll let you have the last word.
It's the question. What should it have looked like from the beginning if David did it right, taking the ultimate high road? That's the question I forgot to ask. And it seems like you're pointing at that, but I think the good thing is with this, for me, the quick conclusion is God should be there from the beginning. And that's the hard part in our lives is every moment, like having God as the buffer in front of us. You talked about a gap earlier.
All right, the quick answer to your question is we don't get that answer in this text. David looks forward to the ultimate David who shows us the answer to that question. The answer to your question is in the cross, right? This particular text answers how we as imperfect people deal with a perfect concept in kind of imperfect ways, right? What we see ideally in the true answer to your question, the one that we all need to strive for, is in the cross. All right, thanks everybody.